So has Disney screwed up or effed up royally? Yeah, I think they have. And I'm going to look at some of the more recent movies and then kind of talk about the history and kind of what's going on from my perspective. And when it comes to entertainment studios, Disney is still the top. However, other companies which weren't traditional studios like Netflix, I think they've already taken over where Disney used to be. But Disney is still a very powerful presence, and they have a lot of valuable, and in some cases, priceless properties. But let's go ahead and look at this, starting with this past weekend's results. So the number one movie this past weekend was Weapons. So this is obviously not a Disney movie, but the second one was Freaky Friday, which is a Disney property, and then the Fantastic Four First Steps. And that's kind of where I want to start off with, because Weapons is a movie that I think a lot of studios would like. In the one case, it was actually a good box office successful opening weekends. And I know 81 million total doesn't sound like a lot, but what you really have to look at is the overall cost. The estimated production budget is 38 million. When you include marketing, profit sharing, everything else, it probably needs to make around 90 million to actually break even. And after this first opening weekend, I think it's well on its way there. Plus, a lot of people enjoyed this movie, both from critics and just normal everyday people. So that's definitely a good sign. Whereas with the Fantastic Four, it currently earned about 437 million worldwide, which is definitely nothing to sneeze at. That is a lot of money. But when it comes to Marvel films, this is probably not going to be considered a box office success. More than likely, it's maybe going to not break even because the production budget's 200 million. When you include marketing and everything else, it probably needs to make around the 600 million before it breaks even. And so more than likely, this might not even break even, and it's going to be a money loser, despite being the highest grossing Fantastic Four film to date, even adjusted for inflation. Which leads me to where I think Disney is really messing up big time. And I think for anybody who pays attention to this stuff, we kind of already saw this coming. But let's start off with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because I think this one is probably the most valuable properties in terms of the number of movies in the series. And so we look back to Iron Man 2008, and once again, this is not adjusted for inflation, but that one is really the first one out of the gate. 186 million budget, it made $585 million, and obviously that's not including marketing and everything else. But this was like the golden age, all the way up to the Avengers, which, wow, that's where the billion-dollar movies was more common thanks to Disney. And so it just went on a long, long streak, especially with the Avengers series movies or something related to it, which most of them are. They were all tied into this. You know, just billion-dollar movies was not something that was uncommon. And whenever we got to Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, you know, over $2 billion. This one's nearly $3 billion. So the highest grossing films of all time, or at least in the top 5. Spider-Man Far From Home, that is also a very successful franchise. But as you can see over the years, the overall box office numbers have gone down, you know. And even though when you look at these numbers, you know, like we have still some that make great money like Deadpool and Wolverine, but overall it has been going down except for a few. And even though you might just look at these numbers plainly at just production budget and then what it actually grossed, it doesn't take into account all the other costs associated with it. And so in general, there's just been a steady decline for just Marvel franchises in general. And some might say it is due to, you know, superhero comic book movie fatigue. And I would say there's definitely validity to that. I'm kind of tired of seeing so many. But at the same time, they're just not making as much money as they used to. And I don't think they're ever going to go back to the highs of the Avengers age. But it's not just the Marvel films as well. If you look at something like Disney, Pixar, I love Pixar, especially with Toy Story. I've just really loved their films. But over time, that has definitely sunk. And the most recent one was Elio, which cost 150 million, not including all the other costs, and it made 147 million worldwide. And Pixar is definitely not the Pixar that we know of, going back to Toy Stories, Finding Nemo, and so many other wonderful movies. I enjoyed practically all of the ones at the beginning, The Incredibles, you name it. I really enjoyed Pixar. Bugs Life, that's one of my favorites. And then we go to the big one, which is I still think the most valuable property that Disney purchased, and that was Star Wars. Now, Star Wars is not quite on the same decline, but it's not quite at the same highs that it used to be. And if we look here, there's been multiple movies that have made $1 billion. The one that is the most popular, and this makes sense, Star Wars: The Force Awakens. People were waiting for a long time for another Star Wars movies, and this one grossed over $2 billion. But the successive movies since then, even though they have grossed $1 billion, they were not as high as the original. And the production budgets and marketing, I still think these are profitable. But I think Star Wars as a whole, the entire franchise has basically gone on a downward trend. And it kind of leads me to the whole thing of how Disney has just effed things up. And I think it's primarily all the years of, in general, just not giving the fans what they want and just being involved in a lot of controversy, politics, just stuff like that that's just outside of making really great films and shows. And I think even if they were to produce better films, and you could argue that the most recent ones for Marvel, the Fantastic Four: First Steps and Thunderbolts, they were good films. I mean, it got good ratings from both critics and just average everyday people, but still they're not profitable. It's because I think the damage has already been done to all of these franchises. Disney is no longer known for what they used to be known for: quality entertainment for the entire family, and movies and shows that you could just go back to over and over, and then those that you grow up with and then you share with your children and family in the future. I no longer think Disney is that same company, and I don't know if they can return to that, because branding what something's known for, especially a company as old as Disney, that takes a long time to build. But as with anything, it takes a very short time to destroy. And I kind of think that's where Disney and all its properties are at right now. I do hope that Disney goes back to producing really quality stuff that Disney is known for. But at this point, if their movies are consistently not making as much money as they used to be, it's going to be more and more challenging, especially when you have so much competition out there. And as I mentioned, Netflix, I think, has pretty much taken over a lot of what Disney has been doing, and they have the profits to show for it. So that's kind of where I think Disney's at and where they're going. If you actually had any thoughts on this, be sure to leave in the comments area below, and I'll see you on another episode.